Black Waitress realized what the mob didn't, and saved the mob boss before. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Emma's hand trembled as she approached table 7 with the wine bottle. She'd recognized the woman sitting across from Dante Romano the moment she walked through the restaurant doors. The same face from the security footage her deceased brother had sent her 6 months ago. The fiancée wasn't who she claimed to be. She was Katerina Volov, assassin for the Bratva. Emma watched the woman's hand slip toward her purse where the gun surely waited. Her heart pounded so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She had seconds to decide. Stay silent and let the most dangerous man in New York die or risk everything to save him. As she poured wine into the glass of the man she thought was her enemy, Emma met his dark eyes. There was no mistaking the intensity of his gaze as it lingered on her, studying her in a way that made her feel exposed. She could hear the clinking of glass in the background as the other guests spoke amongst themselves, oblivious to the danger at the table. Emma's fingers shook, and the wine bottle almost slipped from her hand. She felt a moment of panic, but then her instincts kicked in. As she leaned down to pour the wine, she whispered, "Run now." It was a message, a warning, one that would change both of their lives forever. Dante Romano's eyes locked on hers immediately, his posture straightening. His sharp, calculating mind processed the words almost instantly. She could see the shift in him, the realization that something wasn't right. His fiancée, the woman who had been sitting beside him with such a perfect smile, wasn't who she seemed to be. Emma's heart raced as she straightened up, watching the reaction of the people at the table. For a brief moment, she wondered if she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. What if he turned on her? What if he didn't believe her? Dante's gaze stayed fixed on her, his expression unreadable. Then, just as quickly as the tension had risen, it seemed to dissipate. He stood up slowly, his presence dominating the room as he moved with the controlled grace of a man used to danger. The others at the table looked at him in confusion, but Emma couldn't tear her eyes away from his face. He didn't seem shocked by her warning. He seemed prepared. Dante turned his attention to Katerina, his fiancée, who was now standing in shock. His voice, low and dangerous, broke the silence. "Get up. We're leaving," he commanded. Katerina froze, her face pale. Emma's breath hitched as she saw the woman's hand move toward her purse. But before she could reach it, Dante was already pulling Emma behind him, shielding her from whatever was about to happen next. The room erupted in chaos. Katerina's bodyguards had already drawn their guns, but they were too slow. Dante's own guards moved quickly, weapons already drawn as the first shots rang out. The glass in Emma's hand shattered as the force of the shots rattled the room, and the guests screamed, scrambling to get to safety. Dante moved with deadly precision, guiding Emma toward the back of the restaurant as he barked orders to his men. "Get her out of here. Now." He shoved Emma forward, and she stumbled slightly, but quickly regained her footing. The adrenaline coursed through her, but she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something far bigger than she had anticipated. As they reached the back exit, Dante turned to look at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. "You just saved my life," he said, his voice raw with emotion. But before Emma could respond, a new wave of gunfire erupted from the front of the restaurant, forcing them to move faster. Dante's grip on her wrist tightened as he pulled her into the safety of a waiting car. Emma's mind was racing. How had she known? How had she been able to piece everything together so quickly? Her brother's files, the warning signs, the moments she had seen in the restaurant. It all clicked into place in an instant. But now, as she sat in the car, the weight of what she had just done was beginning to sink in. She had saved Dante Romano, the most dangerous man in New York, but at what cost? And why had she done it? Emma was still catching her breath as the car sped through the streets of New York, the screeching tires and gunfire still fresh in her memory. The chaos at the restaurant had been like something out of a nightmare. But now, as Dante's guards kept a vigilant watch around them, she tried to make sense of what had just happened. They were in the back of a black SUV, the dim lighting inside contrasting with the flashing red and blue lights outside, as emergency vehicles sped by. Her heart was still pounding, but not from fear. No, this was something else. She had just saved a mafia boss's life, and now she was stuck in his world. The man she had warned, Dante Romano, was sitting across from her, his eyes sharp and calculating, as usual. His dark suit, once impeccably neat, now showed signs of the chaos they had just been through. Emma couldn't stop herself from staring at him. She had seen so many sides of him in the last few minutes. Cold, ruthless, protective. But now, there was something else. His gaze softened just slightly when their eyes met, and for the first time, Emma wondered if he saw her as more than just the waitress who had intervened. "You're not going to talk, are you?" Dante's voice broke the silence. It was low, calm, and yet it carried the weight of a man who had just faced death. Emma shook her head, not trusting herself to speak just yet. "I don't blame you," he continued, leaning back in his seat. "I know this is a lot to process. I still don't understand how you knew." Emma stayed silent for a moment, her mind replaying the events. She had known. She had recognized the signs. Her brother's files, the surveillance photos, the details she had pieced together over the past few days. All of it had clicked when she saw Katerina Volov's face. The fiancé had been a part of the plot to kill Dante, and Emma had just exposed it. I don't know," she said finally, her voice shaky. "I just knew something wasn't right. My brother, he was in the FBI. He sent me files before he died. I saw the connections. Katerina, her mark. I remembered it from the files." Dante's eyes narrowed as he processed her words. "Your brother worked for the FBI?" he asked, his tone shifting just slightly. There was a flicker of something in his gaze. "Yes," Emma replied, her throat tightening. "He was investigating the Bratva. The same people who set this up. They killed him, and they were coming for you." Dante's jaw tightened at the mention of the Bratva. Emma could see the flicker of anger in his eyes. "I should have known," he muttered under his breath. "I should have known they'd go this far. Katerina, I trusted her." Emma could see the weight of that realization hit him. Dante Romano, the feared mob boss, had been betrayed by someone he thought he could trust. But instead of focusing on his own anger, he turned his attention back to her. "You saved my life," he said quietly, his voice not just filled with gratitude, but with something else, something deeper. "I don't know how to thank you for that." Emma glanced at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. She had just saved his life, but what did that mean for her now? What did it mean for them? "I just did what I had to do," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't owe me anything." "I disagree," Dante said firmly. He leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You risked everything to save me. That's not something I can ignore." Emma felt a chill run down her spine at his words. She had no idea what that meant. "What are you going to do now?" she asked, unable to keep the fear out of her voice. Dante leaned back in his seat, thinking for a moment. "The Bratva won't stop," he said, his tone darkening. "Katerina and her people will try again. But I won't let them take me down. Not after you saved me." His eyes flicked to her again, and for the first time, Emma saw something human in his gaze, vulnerability. "You're involved now, whether you like it or not," he continued, his voice softening just a little. "I need you. I need someone who can think like you do. Someone who knows how to see what's hidden." Emma swallowed hard, unsure of where this was heading. She had just saved him. But now what? Was she in danger? Or was this something else entirely? Dante's gaze never wavered. "I want you to stay," he said simply. "I don't know what the future holds, but I'm not letting you go. Not after everything you've done." Emma's heart raced as she processed his words. This was not what she had expected. She had thought saving his life would be the end of it, but now, she was more involved than ever. "I don't belong in your world," she said, her voice shaky. "I'm just a waitress." "You're not just a waitress," Dante replied. "You're someone who just saved my life. That's something I don't forget." The car swerved as they took a sharp turn, and Emma felt the weight of his words settle heavily on her chest. She had just crossed a line, and now, there was no going back. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was part of something much bigger. As the car glided through the city streets, Emma's thoughts raced. She had saved Dante Romano's life. She had warned him, and because of that, he was still alive. But now she was in his world, whether she liked it or not. It was a world filled with power, danger, and secrets, a world that had already claimed the life of her brother. Emma looked out the window, her mind reeling with the implications of what Dante had said. He needed her. She had thought her involvement in this mafia world would be brief, but now it seemed like she was tethered to it forever. Dante's calm demeanor hadn't wavered since the attack. He had been cool, collected, but there was an intensity in his eyes that Emma couldn't ignore. They had driven through the night, and as the sun started to rise, the SUV pulled into a sleek, high-rise building. Dante gave her a look that was both reassuring and commanding. "You'll be safe here. For now," he said, his voice steady. Emma nodded, but the weight of his words sank in. For now? It was like a temporary truce, one that would eventually give way to something darker. The doors of the building opened, and they stepped into a pristine lobby. Emma could feel the eyes of the security team watching her every move, as if she were an outsider in a world that wasn't her own. Dante moved through the space with ease, and Emma had no choice but to follow him. "This is my home," he said, leading her into an elevator. "It's where I go to escape the noise, the chaos of the world outside." Emma glanced at him, unsure of how to respond. The chaos outside was nothing compared to the world inside, she imagined. The elevator doors closed, and they began their ascent. Emma felt a knot tighten in her stomach. What was he thinking? She had saved his life, but she had no idea what he expected from her now. As the elevator reached the top floor, Dante motioned for her to follow him. The hallway was quiet, the air thick with an unspoken tension. He led her into a spacious apartment, filled with sleek modern furniture and artwork that screamed wealth and power. It was everything Emma had imagined a mafia boss's residence would look like: cold, elegant, and imposing. Dante turned to her. "You're safe here, for now. I won't let anything happen to you," he repeated, his gaze lingering on her face. "I know you're not used to this, but I'll make sure you understand how things work. I can't afford to have anyone who doesn't know what they're doing around me." Emma swallowed hard, trying to keep her voice steady. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said quietly. "I just wanted to help. I don't belong here." Dante's expression softened for a moment, but only for a moment. "You saved my life. That means something in my world," he said. "And now you're part of this world. You can try to leave, but trust me, that won't be easy." Emma's pulse quickened. She was trapped. There was no way out. She had made a choice by saving him, and now she would have to live with the consequences. "I never asked for any of this," she repeated, the weight of her words hanging in the air. Dante said nothing, his eyes unwavering. He wasn't angry. He was just resigned. "You'll get used to it," he said, turning away from her. "We all do." Emma's mind swirled as she absorbed his words. This was it. There was no going back. She was in the mafia now, whether she wanted to be or not. She had saved a mafia boss, and now she was part of his world. As Dante moved to a nearby window, looking out over the city, Emma stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain. Her life would never be the same again. The days that followed felt like a blur to Emma. She had barely settled into the sleek, impersonal apartment when Dante made it clear that there was no turning back. She was now part of his world, whether she liked it or not. The first few days were quiet, tense. Dante kept his distance, but his presence loomed large. He didn't ask much of her, at least, not at first, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being observed. His men were always around, watching her every move. She was in the safest place she had ever been, but it felt more like a cage than a sanctuary. The lavish apartment, with its panoramic views of the city, felt like a gilded prison. Dante had kept his word, ensuring she was protected from the chaos outside, but Emma knew that the protection came at a price. As much as she tried to distance herself from it, the reality of her situation began to set in. She was living in the heart of the mafia world. The weight of that truth settled heavily on her shoulders. Every time she walked through the halls, every time she passed a guard, she was reminded of who she was with, and who she was now connected to. Dante seemed to notice her growing discomfort. After a few days, he approached her. It was late, and Emma had just finished a quiet dinner in the apartment, something simple that she had prepared herself. Dante didn't eat with her. He hadn't in days. He had his own schedule, his own life to live, and Emma was merely a part of his world now. "You're still not getting comfortable here, are you?" he asked, standing at the door of her bedroom, his silhouette framed by the soft light in the hallway. Emma looked up from her plate, startled by his sudden presence. "I don't belong here," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "I never asked for this." I didn't want any of this. Dante stepped inside, his presence filling the room. I know, he said quietly, almost as if he understood. But you're here now, and you'll need to get used to it. Emma felt. Her chest tightened. She had known he would say something like that, but hearing it out loud made it real. She was trapped. There was no way out. You saved my life, Dante continued, his voice lowering. And now you're under my protection. I don't offer that lightly. People who are under my protection, they belong to me, whether they want to or not. Emma swallowed hard, the implications of his words sinking in. She was tied to him, to his world, for better or worse. What do you want from me? She asked, her voice shaking just a little. Dante looked at her for a long moment, his gaze intense. I need someone I can trust, he said. Someone who can think for themselves. Someone who can see things before they happen. That's why I'm keeping you close. Emma's heart raced as she processed his words. Was that why he had kept her here? Not because he felt gratitude or even a sense of obligation, but because he needed her? The idea stung more than she wanted to admit. I'm not a part of this world, she said, the words almost a plea. Dante stepped forward, his gaze softening. You are now, he said, his voice quieter. And you're not just a part of this world because of what you did. You're here because you've shown me something I don't see in most people. You're smarter than you think. And you've proven it. Emma felt a knot tighten in her chest as she absorbed his words. He wasn't just using her. He actually saw something in her. She didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified. What happens next? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Next, Dante said, pausing as if choosing his words carefully, we prepare. There's a war coming, Emma. The Bratva won't stop, not until they've taken everything from me. And I won't let that happen. Emma felt a chill crawl up her spine. A war. She had known the Bratva was dangerous, but hearing it from Dante's mouth made it all the more real. This wasn't just about saving one life anymore. This was about survival. Dante continued, his voice low and steady. I need someone who can help me see things through. Someone who isn't afraid to make tough decisions. Someone who isn't afraid to act. Emma could feel the weight of his words, and as much as she wanted to run, to walk away from all of this, she knew it was too late. She was already involved. And what about me? She asked, the question hanging in the air between them. What's my place in all of this? Dante looked at her, his eyes piercing. Your place, he said quietly, is wherever you want it to be. But make no mistake, Emma, you've already chosen. And now, you're in this world whether you like it or not. But if you're smart, you'll stay close to me. Because the closer you are, the safer you'll be. Emma looked at him, uncertainty swirling in her chest. She had saved his life, but now she had to save herself. And the only way to do that was to stay with him, to be part of his world, however dangerous it was. Dante turned away then, his expression hardening once more. Get some rest, he said, his voice cold again. Tomorrow, we move forward. Emma nodded, her mind spinning as she watched him walk away. She wasn't sure where she fit into this world, but she was sure of one thing. She was in it now. And there was no turning back. The next few days felt like an endless loop for Emma. She had tried to settle into her new life, but the weight of the situation was impossible to ignore. Dante had made it clear, she was in this world now, whether she liked it or not. Every moment she spent in his world made her feel more like a pawn than a person. His mansion, with its high-end furniture and panoramic city views, had become her prison. But even with all the luxury surrounding her, Emma couldn't shake the sense of unease. Dante's presence was overpowering, even when he wasn't in the room. His eyes were always watching, his mind always calculating. She knew better than to question him directly, but she couldn't help but wonder about her place in this world. What had she really gotten herself into? She had saved his life, yes, but at what cost? Was she just another tool for him to use in his war against the Bratva, or was there more to her involvement? It was only a few days after their conversation that Dante finally made it clear what he wanted from her. I need you to help me with the next phase, he said one evening, his voice as cold and controlled as ever. We're going to take the fight to them. Emma stood in front of him, feeling the pressure of his words. Take the fight to them, she repeated, almost incredulously. You're talking about the Bratva, right? The most dangerous crime family in the world. Dante's gaze didn't waver. Exactly, he said, his eyes narrowing. And they won't stop until they've destroyed everything I've built. We have to be ahead of them. I can't afford to be caught off guard. Emma swallowed, feeling a chill run down her spine. She had seen the kind of power the Bratva wielded firsthand. Their ruthlessness, their ability to infiltrate and destroy. She had no idea what Dante's plans entailed, but one thing was certain. It wasn't going to be easy. "What do you need me to do?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dante leaned forward, his fingers steepled in front of him. "I need you to use your skills," he said, his voice softer now, almost respectful. "You see things others don't. You understand the strategy, the way people think. I need you to help me predict their moves, figure out their next move before they make it." Emma paused, absorbing his words. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She wasn't just a pawn in his game. Dante saw something in her, something she hadn't realized about herself. She had never thought of herself as a strategist, but perhaps this was her chance to prove herself. "I'm not sure I can be that person," she said slowly. "But I'll try, if it means stopping them." Dante's eyes softened for a moment. "That's all I'm asking for," he said, his voice low. "Try, and we'll do this together." The next few days were a whirlwind of planning and action. Dante put Emma to work, having her study maps, financial records, and communication logs. She pored over everything, her mind working in overdrive as she tried to understand the web of connections and alliances that Dante had to navigate. It wasn't long before she began to see the patterns. She saw the way the Bratva moved, the way they thought, the way they manipulated the world around them. As Emma's analysis took shape, she began to notice something that surprised her. Dante wasn't just a ruthless mafia boss. There was a method to his madness, a strategy behind everything he did. He wasn't just acting out of anger or fear. He was playing a game, a high-stakes game, and he was always thinking 3 steps ahead. As she spent more time with him, Emma started to see the man beneath the power, the man who had lost so much and was now fighting for everything he had left. It was a side of him she hadn't expected, and it changed how she saw him. "We're ready," Dante said one night, breaking her from her thoughts. He was standing at the window, looking out over the city. "Tomorrow, we move." Emma nodded, trying to push down the knot of fear that was tightening in her chest. She had never been this involved in something so dangerous, and she knew that stepping into this world meant risking everything. But she also knew that this was her choice now. She had saved his life. She had chosen to stay. And now, there was no going back. "What's the first step?" she asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. Dante turned to face her, his eyes dark and focused. "We go after their money," he said. "Without their resources, they're nothing. We take away their ability to move, to operate. Once we hit them where it hurts, they'll be forced to act." Emma didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." The next day was the beginning of a new phase in their war against the Bratva. Emma had never been more involved in anything in her life, and as much as she wanted to walk away, she knew that she couldn't. This was her fight now, too. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something deeper, something that tied her to Dante in a way she couldn't explain. They were both fighting to hold on to what they had left, and for the first time in a long time, Emma didn't feel alone. The tension in the room was palpable as Dante and Emma sat in front of the large map spread across the table. The strategy was in motion, but the risks were high. Every decision made from this point forward could determine whether they were successful or destroyed. Emma felt the weight of their plan pressing on her shoulders, but she pushed the nerves aside. She had to focus. The Bratva were a ruthless, organized force. If they were going to succeed, they needed to be strategic, careful. Dante had put her in charge of analyzing the financials of the Bratva, understanding their resources, and mapping out their operations. And she had learned more in the past week than she ever thought possible. "We know their cash flow," Dante said, looking over the map. "We've intercepted their accounts and found the routes they use for laundering money. The key is cutting off their access to those funds. Once we do that, they'll be forced to act. And when they act, we'll be ready." Emma nodded. The strategy had a certain elegance to it. They were going to hit them where it hurt, right in their wallets. But the deeper she dug into their operations, the more complicated it became. There were multiple layers of deception. The Bratva didn't just have money. They had influence, control over politicians, law enforcement, and even corporate magnates. Cutting off their resources would be a monumental task, but Emma had seen how Dante operated. He was meticulous, always several steps ahead of anyone else. And now, she was starting to think like him. "What's our next move?" she asked, her voice steady despite the stakes. Dante's eyes met hers, a flicker of approval in them. He could see it now. She was beginning to think like him. We move on the accounts first, he said. But we can't just shut them down. If we do, they'll know something's wrong. We need to quietly redirect their funds to us. Make them think everything is normal until they realize their entire infrastructure is falling apart. Emma took a deep breath. This was where things were going to get tricky. Redirecting money, manipulating systems without being detected. It was dangerous, but it was their best shot. How do we keep our tracks covered? She asked. Dante gave a slight smirk. That's where you come in, he said. We've got a secure channel for communications. You'll make sure nothing is traced back to us. Emma felt a rush of adrenaline. It was one thing to look at the numbers and find patterns, but now, she was going to be in the field, in the thick of it. I'm ready, she said, the determination in her voice clear. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Emma had to work quickly, tracking the movements of the Bratva's money, understanding the way it flowed through various systems. Dante had put together a team of his most trusted allies, men and women who were experts in cyber warfare, finance, and strategy. Together, they created a plan to infiltrate the Bratva's system and redirect the funds to a new account, one that they controlled. Emma was no longer just a part of the plan. She was the mastermind behind the operation. She coordinated with the team, guiding them through the steps to ensure the money was redirected without anyone noticing. Every move had to be precise. Every detail had to be perfect. And as the days passed, Emma could feel the pressure building. They were getting closer, and every step they took felt like they were inching toward the inevitable confrontation with the Bratva. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about survival. As they neared the final phase of the operation, Dante pulled Emma aside. We're almost there, he said, his voice low, serious. But I need to make sure you understand the risks. Once we pull this off, the Bratva will come after us. They won't stop until they've destroyed everything. Emma looked at him, her heart pounding. She had known the risks. She had known that this was going to get dangerous. But hearing him say it out loud made it all feel too real. I understand, she said, her voice steady. But we can't back down now. Dante studied her for a moment, and Emma could see the respect in his eyes. You've changed, he said quietly. I knew you were smart, but this is different. You're starting to think like a leader. Emma felt a wave of emotion wash over her. It was one thing to be a part of this world. It was another to be recognized by the one person who had built it. I'm doing what needs to be done, she said, her voice firm. For both of us. As they moved into the final stages of their plan, Emma realized something that sent a chill through her. There was no going back. This wasn't just about taking down the Bratva. It was about becoming something else entirely. She wasn't just Dante's ally anymore. She was becoming a force in her own right, one that could shape the future of everything she had once feared. And in that moment, Emma knew that there was no turning back. She was in this world now, fully and completely, and she would do whatever it took to survive. The tension in the room had reached its peak. Emma sat in front of the computer screen, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she worked through the final stages of the plan. The money had been redirected, and now, the Bratva had no idea what was coming. Dante had prepared everything meticulously, but as Emma continued to pull the strings from behind the scenes, she could feel the weight of what they were about to do. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about sending a message, one that would resonate throughout the criminal world. Emma had become more than just Dante's ally. She had become his equal. They had worked together, side by side, every step of the way. But now, as she sat in front of the screen, her mind racing, she knew the moment was coming. The Bratva would retaliate. They had to act before they could react. We're ready. Dante's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to face him, his expression as cold and calculating as ever. But there was something else in his eyes. A flicker of respect. Are you sure about this? She asked, her voice steady, but the nerves were still there. This isn't just a job anymore. This is war. Dante's gaze softened for just a moment, before he nodded. We've come this far, Emma. We finished what we started. As they moved into the final phase of their plan, Emma could feel the pressure mounting. The operation had been going smoothly, but she knew that this was the moment when everything could go wrong. The Bratva were not to be underestimated. They were ruthless, and their reach was far. Dante had given her full control over the financial side of things, But now she had to rely on more than just numbers. She had to be sharp, strategic, and ready to make decisions on the fly. The next few hours were critical. She watched as Dante's team prepared for the next move, smuggling funds, diverting shipments, and cutting off supply lines. Everything had to be perfect. There was no room for mistakes. "We hit them at their weakest point," Dante said, his voice low. "Their pride. We expose their vulnerabilities. Once we do that, they'll have no choice but to retaliate. But we'll be ready for them." Emma nodded, understanding the game he was playing. They were using the Bratva's arrogance against them. By attacking their ego, they would force them to make mistakes, and those mistakes would be their downfall. As the hours passed, Emma felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. She was no longer the outsider, the girl from a different world. She was in this now. She was as much a part of the plan as Dante. And whatever happened next, they were in it together. The final piece of the operation was set into motion. Emma's heart raced as she hit the final button, confirming the last transaction. The money had been moved, and now, all they had to do was wait for the Bratva to take the bait. But Emma knew better than anyone that in this world, waiting was just as dangerous as acting. The retaliation would come soon, and when it did, everything would change. Dante stood next to her, his presence a reminder of everything they had risked. "Get ready," he said. "They're coming for us." Emma glanced at him, her mind focused. "Let them come," she replied, her voice steady. "We'll be ready." The silence that followed was deafening. Then, suddenly, the first strike came. It was swift, unexpected, and brutal. The Bratva had taken the bait. They had no idea what they were walking into. As the alarms blared and chaos erupted around them, Emma felt a surge of adrenaline. This was it. The Bratva had made their move, and now it was their turn to make theirs. Dante's men moved quickly, setting up defenses, rerouting communications, and preparing for the fight ahead. Emma worked with them, coordinating everything behind the scenes. She had become an integral part of the operation, and she wasn't about to back down now. As the battle raged on, Emma could feel the weight of the decisions she had made. There was no turning back. This was no longer just about survival. It was about power, control, and taking down the people who had been trying to destroy everything they had worked for. Dante was in the heart of the action, moving through the chaos with the cold precision that had made him the feared boss he was. Emma, though, was the one pulling the strings, making sure their plan stayed on course. It was a dangerous game, but it was the only game they could play now. As the hours dragged on, they kept pushing forward, moving closer and closer to the final showdown with the Bratva. The battle was far from over, but Emma was no longer afraid. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to let it all slip away. This was her world now. She had chosen this path, and she would see it through to the end. The night had grown quiet, but the tension still hung in the air. Emma sat at the edge of the massive desk in Dante's penthouse, watching him as he paced back and forth. The operation was in full swing, but there was still so much left to do. The Bratva had been hit hard, but Emma knew the retaliation would come soon. They wouldn't stop until they had taken their revenge. Dante had made sure his men were ready, his resources spread thin but effective. Emma had been right there beside him every step of the way, her mind constantly running through the possibilities of what could go wrong. But this wasn't just about outsmarting the Bratva anymore. It was about something deeper, about proving herself, about showing that she wasn't just a part of this world. She was one of its most powerful players. As Dante paused to look out the window, his reflection barely visible in the glass, Emma felt a flicker of something unfamiliar. For the first time, she wasn't just his ally, his strategist. She was someone he trusted, and he was beginning to rely on her in ways he hadn't before. She had changed. She could feel it. "We're almost there," Dante said, his voice low but sharp. He turned from the window, locking eyes with her. "The Bratva will make their move soon. We need to be ready to strike back. Harder." Emma stood and walked toward him, the weight of the plan weighing heavily on her shoulders. She had no time for doubt anymore. They had been through too much together. She had made her decision when she chose to stay, when she chose to become part of this world. And now, there was no turning back. "What's the plan?" she asked, her voice steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "We hit them where they least expected," Dante replied, his expression hardening as he walked toward the table. He pointed to the map spread before them. "Their biggest vulnerability is their public persona. They've spent years building a reputation of fear, of invincibility. But we're going to show them they're not untouchable. Emma's mind began to race as she processed his words. Public persona. That was their weakest point. The Bratva had spent so much time crafting their image that they never considered what would happen if it was shattered. We exposed them, Emma said slowly, her fingers tapping on the map as her mind worked through the logistics. We go after their leaders, make them look weak in front of their own men, their allies. Force them to expose themselves. Dante nodded, his eyes gleaming with approval. Exactly, he said, stepping closer. But it's going to take everything we have. We need to be precise, quick, and, most importantly, we need to move before they can retaliate. If they see this coming, they'll counter it immediately. Emma's heart skipped a beat. She had always known the stakes were high, but now, as the weight of their plan pressed down on her, she realized how close they were to the edge. And what happens after we expose them? She asked. Dante's gaze softened just slightly. Then we finish them off. We remove their support, their infrastructure. We make sure they have no way to rebuild. Emma nodded. The plan was set. They had the Bratva on the ropes, but this was just the beginning. They had to strike quickly before they could regroup. When do we move? She asked, already preparing herself for the chaos that was about to unfold. Dante didn't hesitate. Tonight, he said, his voice low and steady. We act tonight. Emma felt the weight of his words, but she was ready. She had come this far. She wasn't going to stop now. Let's do it, she said, her voice calm and clear. The hours that followed were a blur of activity. Dante's men moved swiftly, taking action on every front. Emma worked in the shadows, behind the scenes, pulling the strings that would bring everything down. It wasn't just about outsmarting the Bratva anymore. It was about control, about proving that they were the ones in charge. As the operation unfolded, Emma could feel the pieces falling into place. They were so close to their goal, and yet, she knew the hardest part was still ahead. It wasn't just about taking down the Bratva. It was about making sure they stayed down. The hours felt like days as they carried out the plan, coordinating every move with precision. And then, at last, they hit them. The Bratva's entire infrastructure began to crumble as Emma and Dante's plan unfolded with perfect timing. It was a masterpiece. Emma's heart raced as she watched the response from their enemies. The chaos they had caused was palpable, but it was too late. The Bratva had been exposed. And now, the tables had turned. As the dust settled, Dante turned to Emma, his expression unreadable. We did it, he said quietly. Emma met his gaze, her mind still processing everything that had just happened. It's not over yet, she replied, her voice calm but firm. Dante gave a slight nod, his eyes meeting hers with a new sense of respect. No, it's not over. But we've won the first round. Emma couldn't help but smile, a flicker of pride in her chest. They had done it. And now, nothing could stop them. The atmosphere in the penthouse had shifted. The weight of their victory was palpable, but so was the undercurrent of danger. Emma stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker below her, lost in thought. The Bratva had been exposed, their infrastructure in chaos, but she knew it wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Dante had been right. The Bratva would retaliate. It was only a matter of time before they regrouped and came for them, and when they did, it would be a fight to the finish. Emma had never felt the weight of her choices more than she did now. She had been a part of something that would change the course of their world, and she was committed. There was no turning back. The silence in the room was broken by the sound of Dante's footsteps approaching. He didn't speak immediately, but the weight of his presence was undeniable. You did well, he said finally, his voice steady, though there was a trace of something else in it. Respect, perhaps, or something more. Emma turned to face him, her mind still buzzing with the aftereffects of their success. We're not done yet, she replied, her voice firm. Dante nodded, his expression unreadable. No, we've exposed them, but we need to make sure they don't come back. We need to finish what we started. Emma's stomach tightened at the thought. The plan was working. They had crippled the Bratva, but the real challenge was yet to come. Dante had made it clear from the start, when the Bratva retaliated, they needed to be ready for anything. And they couldn't afford to show any weakness. Emma had seen the ruthless side of Dante. She had seen him make decisions that were cold and calculated, decisions that left no room for mercy. But she had also seen the man behind the boss, the man who was driven by something deeper than just power. There was something personal about this battle for him, something that went beyond the criminal empire he had built. She had been his ally in this fight, but now, as they prepared for what was to come, she realized that she had become something more. She was a partner. What's the plan? Emma asked, her mind already shifting into strategy mode. Dante looked at her, his gaze intense. We prepare for the final blow. We have to hit them where they least expect it, right in their alliances. The Bratva doesn't just operate with money. They have influence. We're going to use that against them. Emma's heart skipped a beat. They were going after the Bratva's ties to the political world, their allies in law enforcement, their connections in high places. This was a move that could cripple them permanently, but it would be dangerous. We have to be careful, she said, her voice measured. If we go too far, we risk exposing ourselves. We need to make sure everything is in place before we make our move. Dante nodded, a flicker of approval in his eyes. Exactly. We've come this far, Emma. We can't afford any mistakes. The next few days were a blur of activity. Emma worked alongside Dante's most trusted operatives, carefully navigating the web of connections the Bratva had spent years building. They traced every deal, every handshake, every illicit transaction, knowing that the key to taking them down was exposing the very foundations on which their power rested. Emma's role in all of this had grown, and she felt it. She wasn't just working behind the scenes anymore. She was a central part of the operation, making decisions, planning the moves that would take them one step closer to victory. But the pressure was mounting. Every decision, every move, had consequences. And as much as Emma tried to focus, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking a fine line. The Bratva had resources, connections, and power in places they hadn't even begun to explore. If they were going to bring them down, they had to be prepared for everything. The day of the final strike arrived sooner than Emma expected. They had everything in place. The information had been gathered, the players were positioned, and now it was time to act. Emma and Dante stood side by side in his office, overlooking the city they had fought for. The tension was thick in the air. They both knew what was at stake. This is it, Dante said, his voice low but resolute. We move now. Emma nodded, her heart racing. There was no more time for second-guessing. They had made it this far, and they weren't turning back. The plan had been set into motion. As they made their final moves, Emma couldn't help but think about the journey that had brought her here. She had been a waitress, a girl trying to survive in a world that didn't care. And now, she was standing next to one of the most powerful men in the world, a partner in a battle that could change everything. As they moved through the final stages of their plan, Emma felt a sense of finality settling in. They were close to the endgame now, and everything they had worked for would come down to this. The Bratva was about to face its greatest challenge, and Emma was right at the center of it. She wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. She was fighting for power, for control, and for a future that she had never imagined possible. And as the final pieces of the puzzle fell into place, Emma knew one thing for certain. This fight would define everything. This was her world now. She had chosen it, and she was going to see it through to the end. The air in the penthouse was thick with anticipation as the hours ticked by. Emma stood in front of the massive map spread across the table, the weight of their plan pressing on her chest. They had executed the final phase of their strategy, striking at the heart of the Bratva's alliances, but the aftermath was just beginning. The next move was crucial. She could feel the tension rising in the air, thick with the understanding that the Bratva would not go down without a fight. They had hit them hard, but now it was time to see how the enemy would respond. Emma's mind raced, reviewing every piece of their plan, analyzing every possible outcome. The Bratva had powerful connections, and with their infrastructure crumbling, they would retaliate. The thought made her pulse quicken, but she forced herself to focus. There was no room for mistakes. Dante had been right all along. The final blow had been dealt, but they needed to be prepared for whatever came next. The sound of Dante's footsteps echoed through the room, pulling Emma from her thoughts. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light of the hallway. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply stood there, each aware of the gravity of the situation. It's done, Dante said finally, his voice low, yet tinged with something that might have been relief, or perhaps just the calm before the storm. Emma nodded, her eyes fixed on the map in front of her. For now, she replied, her voice steady. But they won't stop. Dante crossed the room, his gaze never leaving her. No, they won't, he agreed. But we've taken the first step. We've exposed them. Now we hit them where it hurts. Emma turned to face him, her heart pounding. She knew what that meant. The Bratva's reputation was everything to them. They had spent years building it, creating an image of invincibility. Now, they had to take it down. How do we make them crumble? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante's expression hardened, the familiar ruthlessness returning to his gaze. We make their enemies see the cracks. We use their own alliances against them. We make sure their power looks fragile, weak. When their allies turn on them, they'll have no choice but to fall. Emma felt the chill of his words sink deep into her. The Bratva's strength lay in their connections, in the trust they had built with the powerful figures around them. Without those connections, they were nothing. But turning those alliances was dangerous. It wasn't just about taking down one enemy. It was about taking down an entire empire. We have to be careful, Emma said, her voice filled with concern. If we push too hard, they'll expose us. Dante paused, considering her words. You're right, he said, his voice softening slightly. But we've come too far to turn back now. If we hesitate, we risk losing everything. The weight of his words settled over Emma like a heavy blanket. This was it. They were all in. There was no room for fear, no room for second-guessing. The decision had been made. They would move forward, no matter the consequences. What's our next step? She asked, her voice steady once more. Dante met her gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of determination and something else. Respect, maybe. We make sure their allies feel the pressure, he said. We leak information, carefully timed, to make them question where their loyalties lie. We make sure the Bratva's enemies know what they've been hiding. Once the trust breaks, the rest will fall apart. Emma nodded, already formulating the plan in her mind. They had done the hard work. Now, they had to execute the final phase with precision. As the days passed, Emma and Dante worked tirelessly, coordinating with their contacts, ensuring that the information they leaked was both damaging and timely. Every move was calculated, every word chosen carefully. The Bratva's allies began to shift, the cracks in their alliances widening. It was happening. But even as Emma watched the pieces fall into place, a part of her couldn't help but wonder how long they could keep this up. The Bratva was relentless, and their enemies, though eager to see them fall, were just as dangerous. The tension was unbearable. Dante knew it too. As he stood by her side, watching the pieces of their plan fall into place, Emma could feel the storm brewing. We're close, Dante said quietly. But this isn't over. Not by a long shot. Emma didn't need him to tell her that. She had seen it in the way their enemies moved, in the way they gathered strength in the shadows. The Bratva would fight back, and when they did, it would be a war like no other. How long before they retaliate? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante glanced at her, his face unreadable. Soon, he said. But when they do, we'll be ready. Emma nodded. They had prepared for this. But no amount of preparation could make them ready for what was to come. They had taken down the Bratva's foundation, but now, they had to face the storm that was about to hit. As Dante turned away, his expression hardening once more, Emma knew one thing. The real battle was just beginning. The night felt colder than usual as the city hummed below, the lights flickering like distant stars in the dark expanse. Emma stood by the window, her thoughts swirling with the aftermath of their attack on the Bratva. The operation had gone according to plan, but the real test was still ahead. As the minutes passed, she couldn't shake the feeling of impending danger. Dante had always been a step ahead, but now, Emma was starting to understand that nothing could ever be fully controlled in this world. The Bratva were wounded, but they weren't out. They were cunning, ruthless, and they would retaliate. She had seen it in the way their allies had started to distance themselves. The cracks were showing, but it wasn't enough. The storm was building, and Emma knew it was only a matter of time before they struck back. Dante's footsteps echoed behind her, pulling her from her thoughts. He didn't speak immediately, but Emma could feel his presence as if it were a force of its own. They're coming, he said after a long pause. His voice was low, but sharp, carrying the weight of a man who had been in this game far too long to think otherwise. Emma turned to face him, her heart racing. What's the plan? She asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Dante stepped closer, his eyes hard with resolve. We hit them before they can fully recover. We take everything they have left, strip them of their power, their allies, everything that makes them strong. Emma nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was saying. This wasn't just about taking down their resources anymore. This was about annihilation. Dante had no intention of just surviving this battle. He intended to wipe the Bratva out entirely. We do it strategically, Dante continued. We make them feel like they're still in control, just long enough for us to take their last piece of power. We find their weaknesses, exploit them, and once we've got them, we destroy them. Emma's heart raced with the weight of his words. The plan had worked so far, but this was a new level. There was no room for error now. They were playing a game of high stakes, and one wrong move could cost them everything. How do we get them to feel like they're still in control? She asked, her mind already working through the strategy. Dante smiled, a cold, calculating expression that sent a chill through Emma. We let them believe they're winning. We feed them information, let them think they're getting stronger, and then, when they least expect it, we take it all away. We make them turn on each other. Emma swallowed, feeling a weight settle on her shoulders. This was the kind of plan that could take down an empire. But she knew that it would also make enemies of everyone who had ever been loyal to the Bratva. If they pulled this off, they would leave no survivors. And once they turn on each other? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante's expression hardened. Then we finish them off. Once they're weakened, once they've lost their allies, we move in for the kill. We've been patient. Now we take it all. Emma's heart pounded in her chest as she absorbed his words. They were about to launch the final phase of their war against the Bratva, and there would be no turning back. When do we move? She asked, her voice steady but filled with the weight of what was to come. Dante didn't hesitate. Tonight, he said. We make the first strike. We've already planted the seed of doubt. Now we make sure it grows. Emma nodded, a surge of adrenaline rushing through her. Tonight. The plan was in motion, and there was no time to waste. They couldn't afford to wait any longer. It was time to take the fight to the Bratva. The next few hours were a blur. Emma worked alongside Dante's inner circle, coordinating with the team, ensuring that every move was perfectly timed. They had already set the trap. Now, all they had to do was wait for the Bratva to take the bait. The tension in the air was suffocating as they waited for the signal. Emma could feel her heartbeat in her throat as she checked the time for the 100th time. She knew that once the operation began, everything would change. She was no longer the outsider she had once been. She was in this, fully and completely. Dante's voice broke through her thoughts. It's time, he said, his expression unreadable. Let's finish this. They moved swiftly, the team working like a well-oiled machine. Emma stayed in the shadows, pulling the strings, making sure everything went according to plan. Every step they took, every move they made, was calculated, and for the first time, Emma felt a sense of power in it. She wasn't just following orders anymore. She was the one making them. The Bratva had fallen right into their trap. Their internal fractures deepened as information was leaked at just the right moment, turning ally against ally. The power that had once made them untouchable was now their greatest weakness. Emma watched as the chaos unfolded. They were breaking. The Bratva were crumbling, just as she had predicted. But even as she watched their empire begin to fall apart, Emma knew that this wasn't over. It had only just begun. As the first wave of chaos hit, Emma turned to Dante, her eyes locking with his. He nodded, signaling that the next phase was ready. They had exposed the Bratva for what they were. Now, they had to finish them off, and they couldn't afford to wait any longer. The storm was coming, and it was going to be a war like no other. The night had become a storm, the chaos echoing through the streets of the city as Emma stood at the center of it all. The Bratva had taken the bait, and their crumbling empire was now on full display. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment hanging over her like a shadow. Dante had led them to this point, but now it was time for the final act. She had been a part of this from the very beginning, but tonight, she was the one pulling the strings. The plan had worked perfectly, too perfectly. Their enemies were distracted, their alliances torn apart, and now it was time to finish what they had started. Emma's heart raced as she moved through the corridors of the penthouse, every step purposeful, every thought focused on the endgame. They had already exposed the Bratva for what they were, but the real work had only just begun. Now, they had to strike fast, hit them where it hurt, and make sure they could never recover. The room was dark when Dante walked in, his expression hard. But there was something else in his eyes, an understanding that this moment was different. "We're close," he said, his voice steady as he looked at Emma. "But we're not done yet. We need to make them feel the loss. The Bratva can't rebuild if they have nothing to rebuild with." Emma nodded. She knew what he meant. The Bratva had thrived on their connections, their wealth, their influence. But now, all of that was slipping away. And once they had lost it, they would never be the same. "How do we finish them?" she asked, her voice filled with resolve. Dante's eyes met hers, and for a moment, the intensity between them was undeniable. "We go after their leadership," he said, his voice low. "We expose their weakness, make them question their own power. When their leaders are vulnerable, the rest of them will fall apart." Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was the point where things could go wrong. They had planned for this, but now, they had to execute it perfectly. There was no room for mistakes. "We've already set the pieces in motion," she said. "The media, the politicians, their allies, they're all ready to turn on them." Dante nodded, but his gaze remained focused. "We need to do more than just expose them. We need to make sure they feel the weight of their own actions. If we make them panic, they'll make mistakes. And when they do, we'll be there to finish it." Emma could feel the rush of adrenaline as she realized the gravity of the plan. This wasn't just about taking down a criminal empire. It was about dismantling everything the Bratva had built. It was about ensuring they could never rise again. "I'm ready," Emma said, her voice steady, despite the storm swirling around them. Dante gave her a brief, calculating look, then turned toward the door. "Let's move." As they moved into the final phase of the operation, the world outside seemed to stand still. The city, once bustling and alive, now felt like a waiting battlefield, ready for the clash that would come. Emma worked quickly, communicating with their contacts, ensuring that everything was in place. The Bratva's leaders were already feeling the pressure, and now it was time to push them over the edge. Dante's men had infiltrated their ranks, quietly turning the key players against one another, setting the stage for the final blow. Emma felt the weight of every decision she had made in the last few days. This wasn't just a game anymore. The Bratva had to be broken, and they were going to do it, step by step, with precision and ruthlessness. As the final pieces of their plan fell into place, Emma watched the first signs of panic emerge. A phone call, a secret meeting, a whisper in the right ear, and the Bratva's leaders were already beginning to crumble. Emma knew they were close to the end. The leaders who had once seemed invincible were now exposed, their vulnerabilities laid bare for the world to see. The media had been tipped off, the politicians had been swayed, and the public was already turning against them. They had lost everything they had spent years building, and now, all that was left was the fallout. Dante turned to Emma, his expression unreadable. "It's happening," he said, his voice steady but filled with a sense of finality. "They're breaking, but we need to make sure we finish this." Emma nodded, her heart racing. She had no doubt that they had won, but she also knew that the Bratva would fight back with everything they had. They couldn't afford to stop now. As the storm of destruction raged around them, Emma stayed calm, keeping her focus on the task at hand. They had come too far to let it slip away now. "We finished them," Emma said, her voice cold with determination. Once and for all. With that, the final blow was struck. The Bratva's leaders were brought down, their empire disintegrating in front of their eyes. Emma felt the rush of victory, but she also knew the war was far from over. The battle had been won, but there would be consequences. Dante looked at her, a flicker of something in his eyes, a recognition of the role she had played in bringing them this far. "You did it," he said quietly. Emma didn't respond. She didn't need to. The game was over. The Bratva had been destroyed, and nothing would ever be the same again. The city was eerily silent in the wake of their victory. The storm that had threatened to destroy everything had passed, but the aftermath was far from over. Emma stood on the balcony of the penthouse, looking out at the skyline, her mind still racing. The Bratva were no more. Their empire had crumbled, their leaders defeated, their power stripped away. It had all happened so quickly, and yet, in some ways, it had felt like it took a lifetime. The hours spent planning, the moments of doubt, the decisions that had weighed so heavily on her. Now it was over. But Emma knew that the world they had created, the world they had fought for, was never truly free from danger. Power was never permanent. She could feel the weight of that truth in the pit of her stomach. Dante walked up behind her, his footsteps soundless against the marble floor. She didn't turn to face him. She didn't need to. She knew he was there. "It's over," he said, his voice low, but with a sense of finality that echoed in the quiet room. Emma nodded, though she still felt the tension in her chest. "Is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "For now," Dante replied. "But the world doesn't stop turning. There's always more to fight for, more to lose." Emma exhaled slowly, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "So what now?" she asked. Dante paused for a moment, considering her question. "Now we rebuild," he said. "But it won't be the same. We've destroyed an empire, but we've also created something new. The question is, what do we want that new world to look like?" Emma thought about his words. The past few weeks had been a whirlwind of chaos, of decisions made in the heat of the moment, of blood spilled and lives changed forever. But Dante was right. They had come out on top. They had dismantled the Bratva, taken down their leaders, and exposed their corruption to the world. And now, it was time to move forward. But where would they go from here? She had saved him, had stood by his side through it all, and now, she was part of something bigger than she had ever imagined. But what did that mean for her future? Was she just a piece in Dante's game, or did she have a place of her own? "What do you want, Emma?" Dante's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to face him, her gaze meeting his. There was no hiding now. There was no more pretending. The truth was clear. She was part of his world, for better or worse. "I want to make sure this never happens again," she said quietly. "I want to make sure the people who lost everything, the ones we've fought for, have a chance to rebuild. To live in a world where they don't have to fear the kind of power the Bratva held." Dante's expression softened for a moment, a flicker of something else crossing his face, something human. "You've changed," he said, his voice almost tender. "I've seen that in you. You're no longer just a bystander in this world. You're a force, Emma." Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words, but it didn't erase the weight of the reality she was facing. There would be no easy answers. The world they had created would never be free of danger. There would always be someone else, another enemy lurking in the shadows. But that was the world they had chosen. And now, they had to learn how to navigate it. Dante stepped closer to her, his eyes fixed on hers. "The world is ours, Emma. But we have to decide what we want to do with it. We can rebuild it, reshape it, make it something better. Or we can let it fall apart and start again." Emma stood there for a moment, weighing his words. The choices ahead of them were endless. They could rebuild everything they had destroyed, take the lessons from the past, and create a new future. Or they could walk away, leave the chaos behind, and start over. But she knew one thing for sure. There was no going back to the life she had before. That person was gone. And the world that awaited her now was one she would have to help shape. "We rebuild," she said, her voice steady, filled with a new sense of purpose. Dante nodded, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, pride, maybe, or recognition. "Then we rebuild together," he said. The next few months were a blur of change, of rebuilding and reshaping the world they had fought to destroy. Emma took charge of several projects, using the connections they had built to strengthen their position. Dante had become the figurehead, the leader who controlled the future of the empire. But Emma knew it was not just about power. It was about making sure that the people who had suffered at the hands of the Bratva were given the chance to start anew. As they worked side by side, Emma realized that this was no longer just about survival. It was about creating something worth living for. Something that wasn't built on fear and violence, but on trust, respect, and the promise of a better future. And as she looked at Dante, standing beside her, she realized that they were no longer just allies. They were partners. Partners in rebuilding a world that had been broken. Together, they would make sure it never fell apart again. In this captivating tale, the thrilling world of romance stories unfolds through the eyes of Emma, a woman thrust into a dangerous game of power, loyalty, and survival. As she becomes entangled with a mafia boss, their growing connection challenges everything she thought she knew about herself and the world around her. With each twist, the story dives deep into the complex dynamics of trust, betrayal, and love, making it one of the most engaging romance stories you'll ever encounter. As Emma and her unlikely partner face impossible odds, they must navigate a web of danger and deception while building a future together. In this world of intrigue and betrayal, the line between love and power becomes increasingly blurred. If you're a fan of intense romance stories filled with suspense and passion, this journey will keep you hooked until the very end. With every decision they make, Emma and her partner learn more about their own strengths and weaknesses, ultimately finding a bond that could reshape their future. As the stakes rise, they must decide if their love can survive the chaos and danger surrounding them. Whether you love action-packed plots or deep emotional connections, this is a must-read for anyone who craves compelling romance stories that tug at the heart and challenge the mind.